So we've dug into some of the details about what it might mean to be a part of skillful interactions. And what has probably seemed evident is that what I've emphasized so far might best fit kind of one-on-one, right? And whereas classroom teaching is very often anything but that. And so as we move into this next segment of discussing the environment of the classroom, I'd want first to point out that each of your spaces of where you work is very different. And while I taught, I was an orchestra director, so I hopped around a lot. I worked at 3 different schools during every day, and I usually had like a little cart with my guitar and the violin hanging off the back of it and pushed it around from room to room sometimes. So that's a very different environment than maybe some of you, maybe similar to some too. So I would be remiss if I were to describe how your classroom should look, right? So that's not certainly what I would even dare do. But there are some things that I think would be helpful to consider reassessing in whatever space you use to do your work. And as we talk about the classroom or the environment in general, where you work with students, where you connect with them, where in fact the relationships you have with students begin and grow and sustain, I think a really important part of that might be how things are begun, how the stage is set. And that means like how you set the space up, but that's really something you probably already know quite a lot about, and you've known what works and what doesn't, or you're getting there at least. But what I would suggest is that deciding to make the beginning of the day or the class be intentional, that might be a really important thing, to not set the physical environment, but set the mental or emotional or relational environment. And so modeling and even teaching skills of attending to one another, of listening to one another, of expressing oneself, and of sharing or cooperating in the space that you use. In addition to that, setting the beginning intentionally, I think, could be really important. In some levels or some grades, it's built in sort of to the curriculum, with like the morning meeting, for instance, in early grades. And those are really so essential. It seems to me like it might make sense to carry some of that, at least principle, into the later grades, even through high school, of having an intentional beginning of some sort, even in the middle and high school grades. And if you're in the younger grades, actually really making that morning meeting or that beginning part of the routine of the day, not just to make sure everyone knows what they're going to do and to rally corral the troops, so to speak, but to actually get something of connective value out of it, to deepen and nurture those relationships that are the platforms of where learning takes place. And so this might look have a tremendous amount of variation. I mean, there's lots of things you could read. I think there's even a text called The Morning Meeting Book that you could probably get some good ideas out of. But in general, what I would suggest is allow some openness or flexibility of some kind of non-academic but organized conversational space. And allow that to be a time where you begin to set and deepen a culture of connection in the classroom, or again, whatever space you use. As I've mentioned maybe a couple of times before, while the learning might actually take place within the student, the teaching, the process of unfolding and that teaching happens in between. And that in-between space should really be protected and cared for. And so setting the time to do so as a routine, as a part of the day, just makes it ready at hand. It makes it really accessible. And so doing that more routinely can be helpful, and also leaving little pockets of space during which connection between with individual students can happen could be helpful to allow that to be fostered. And while you're doing this, you're not only protecting the relationships between you and the students, you're also modeling to everyone in the room, and whoever's there sees how relationships are cultivated, how they're strengthened, how they're deepened. And as I mentioned in our discussion of attachment, when young people are influenced by their caregivers or the older figures in their lives, the mature figures in their lives, what they're doing is they're borrowing the matured developmental functions of those caregivers or of those teachers in this case. So watching and observing you deepen and develop relationships with others is just a wide open teaching moment. And that happens all the time. You can just teach moment to moment to moment to moment based on how you interact with others. And so using time intentionally as a part of the class schedule, part of the class routine, and it doesn't have to be more than 3 minutes, 5 minutes. That's one way to build it in, and also using pockets of time to leave open for individual connections can also be incredibly important. And you can use this just open and let it be filled with whoever's around, or you can also intentionally have check-ins with individual students just as they're walking into the room, as you're walking by them, things like that. A simple, hey, how are things going for you in your world can really mean a lot. And that's also a really good way to screen for things that, for instance, you may make a referral to the guidance for a student to see me in your district. And that's extremely helpful for the student because you don't have to wade through a lot of discussion. You can just kind of take a little sip of their emotional state just with a simple question. It doesn't take more than 45 seconds or so. So in addition to that, creating culture of connection in the classroom and kind of building it into the routine, I might also suggest that as a part of that maturing function of helping students learn how to establish and deepen relationships, a part of what might also be helpful for them is allowing them to develop habits of choice, of responsible choice. And so offering or extending them choice, either academically, which can be pretty tough sometimes, but also modeling and teaching emotional choice. And what I mean by that is showing students through your own modeling, but also directly teaching them, explicitly teaching them how to engage with their own emotions in a way that frees up a space of choice for them. And so these lessons of helping them learn how to have relationships with others is kind of paired up with how they can learn to have relationships with themselves, with their own states of emotion. And so in a later video, I'll describe a few ways that you might actually really explicitly, overtly say, hey, look, these are some ways that people find helpful to deal with their own emotions. And that could be something you try sometimes. But in general, just having an encouraging attitude toward the students in your life and modeling this fact too, that there is choice to feed more rational, loving, beneficial, and helpful types of mindsets. And while not fighting others, actually letting go of a lot of rumination, of a lot of negativity, of a lot of anxiety, of a lot of spite. And modeling that and demonstrating that and even talking about it sometimes directly can, again, help students develop relationships with themselves in new and mature ways, while you also help them develop relationships that are healthy or long-lasting with their peers, with those around them.